Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you today. I'm sorry that it can't be in person. However, I'm coming to you from my home on Bainbridge Island, which is in Puget Sound, just about a 40-minute ferry ride from Seattle. In preparing and looking through the possibilities of what I would share with you today, Hanif suggested that I talk about the essence, the heart of compassion. And I think that's really an important place to start. And in pulling together my notes, it dawned on me that compassion really is a radical word. It's a radical idea. And, radical meaning to get to the root of something. And I thought that what I would do is to put together some slides that would help on this journey that we're going to take today, even though it's somewhat of a brief sojourn. Karen Armstrong is the person who came up with the idea of the Charter for Compassion. And in one of the questions that she received about why compassion, she said, I don't think compassion is an option for us. It's essential for the survival of our species. And at the same time, she said, compassion is a practically required knowledge. It's like learning to dance or playing the violin or anything that becomes a skill. You must do it and you must practice it diligently each day. And the Dalai Lama has said love and compassion are necessities. They're not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. He also said, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. Compassion means to suffer together. And the noted Vietnamese monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, has said compassion is a verb. There's something else that we might want to consider here, and that oftentimes compassion is used when in fact the situation is really one of empathy. When you see someone hungry and you have an emotional reaction, and perhaps you witness a colleague who might be maligned, you have a concern for these people. Then this isn't compassion, it's empathy. Among emotional researchers, empathy is defined as the feeling that arises when you're confronted with another person's suffering and you feel motivated to relieve that suffering. But compassion's not the same as empathy. Though the concepts are really very much related, empathy refers more generally to our ability to feel the emotions of another person. Compassion is when those feelings and those thoughts include the desire to help, but more than that, you do help. Research shows that when we feel compassion, our heart rate slows down, we secrete the bonding hormone oxytocin, and regions of our brain linked to empathy, caregiving, and feelings of pleasure light up, which often results in our wanting to approach and care for other people. It means that we begin to take care of other people, animals, the environment, and, as importantly, ourselves. Scientific research on compassion shows that being compassionate can improve our health, our well-being, and our relationships. Many scientists believe that compassion may even be vital to the survival of our species. Hence, going back to what Karen Armstrong reminded us about. And that finding advantages can be increased through targeted exercises and practice. That practice can make perfect. I'd like to share a really brief video with you. And it's one that was made by a wonderful researcher at the University of California in Berkeley. And let's take a look at it first. So here we are. That was Delsher Kiltner from, as he was saying, he's both attached to UCLA in Southern California and also at the University of California in Berkeley, there's a lot of research being done today on compassion. We have the Center for Compassion and Altruism at Stanford University with Dr. James Doty. And there is just a great deal that seems to be coming out almost weekly about our understanding of neuroscience and compassion. In fact, Oxford University, just within the last year and a half, has published a very large book on compassion and the science of compassion. So I would suggest that if you're interested in exploring that as a topic, there's quite a lot of information out there. But as I said, we're going to get hopefully to the root of things. So that when Karen Armstrong won the TED Prize, and that was the event that really started and put into motion the Charter for Compassion, the organizers of TED claimed that compassion was the very best idea humanity ever had. And it seems to be built into the core of our very being, as Delsher told us about. However, more than often, it gets completely lost. But what would happen if every single person, or at least a very majority of us, made empathy and compassion our central and sole focus? What if every person put everything else aside and actually began to, uh, to explore compassion as a skill? The Golden Rule basically calls to make compassion central to our actions. And it's obviously not as golden right now as it might be. While every institutional religion speaks highly of it as a model for human behavior, far too often it is institutional politics and power that determine institutional behavior. Without the Golden Rule put to practice, hatred, prejudice, neglect, and horror can follow. However, we are hardwired for compassion, to act on the needs of others, to bring less suffering in the world. Fortunately, each of us has deep reservoirs of compassion. Into this mix of theological theory and daily life comes the Charter for Compassion. As I mentioned, instituted by Karen Armstrong and contributed online by 180,000 plus people. It was written by a group of religious thinkers from across the spectrum of beliefs. The Charter reminds us of what all spiritual endeavors aim for. And what I'd like to do is to share the Charter for Compassion read for you. So, it's really worth repeating one of the lines of the Charter for Compassion. And that is, compassion impels us to work tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of our fellow creatures, to dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and put another there, and to honor the inviolable sanctity of every single human being, treating everyone without exception with absolute justice, equity, and respect. As we have seen through the work of Deltra Keltner, it is likely that the Golden Rule is really the basis of our evolution. And it may be that altruism in individuals based on modeling others as oneself confers evolutionary fitness. It is rather obvious that our world is interdependent. What happens in one part of the globe has an effect in another part, whether it is economic, environmental, or cultural. This is clearly another step in our evolution. So perhaps now there is a new evolutionary imperative to both deepen and widen the Golden Rule. It is rather obvious in this interdependent world that we have a huge goal. We need to walk the walk. We need to speak out, and at times we need to get our hands dirty. I'm very convinced that the Charter for Compassion is what the world needs right now. From Confucius, Lao Tzu, the Buddha, Jesus, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be unto him, Jesus, to the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, and Pope Francis, people have preached compassion for centuries, but how often is it that they put it into practice? Religion, which should advocate for compassionate living, is too often seen as part of the problem. In light of recent events, shootings, assassinations, the conflicts throughout the Middle East, in our neighboring New Zealand, the world is filled with injustices, unequal distribution of wealth, lack of access to basic needs of education, food, and water. There's a mood of despair around, and despair is a dangerous thing because once people lose hope, they cannot resort to living a life that is equal to other people, and oftentimes they move towards extreme measures. Compassion isn't popular as a virtue. People often prefer to be right. There is no compassionate quick scheme for things. There is a struggle for a lifetime because there are aspects in it that militate against compassion. For example, it's hard to love our enemies. We are driven by our legacy from our reptilian ancestors. It makes us put ourselves first, become angry, and when we feel threatened in any way, many of us lash out. Just like I'm certain each of you do, I struggle with compassion all the time, almost every day. Like you, I spend some time talking to myself and kind of questioning what my action is going to be or what my words are going to be. Nonetheless, we must force ourselves back to the theme of compassion. It's time we build a global community where people of all opinions and all ethnicities can live together in harmony. Isn't it time for us to get to work, to make our voices heard? Making space for the other in our minds and in our hearts and in our policies is essential. We're always talking about the importance of democracy, But I think it is perilous in this world. We need global democracy where all people's voices are heard, not just those of the rich and the powerful and of the movers and the shakers, but of the homeless, the disenfranchised, for all who live on the fringe of society. There have been many who turn to the Charter for hope. And there are others who say that our prescription for compassion is naive. Think of Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, Chico Mendes, Rabindranath Tagore, of Gandhi, of Nelson Mandela. One sees what one person can do, the tremendous impact. A decision to seek reconciliation, as Mandela chose, and not revenge, can really change the movement of a group of people, of a society of people. We have to be optimistic, because when optimism fails and despair takes over, then we have a problem. It's essential that we learn about compassion. You cannot learn to swim by sitting on the side of the pool watching others cavort in the water. You have to take the plunge and learn to float. If you persevere, you will acquire an ability that at first seemed impossible. It is the same with compassion. We can learn about the neurological makeup of the brain and the requirements of our tradition, but until and unless we actually modify our behavior and learn to think and act towards others in accordance with the Golden Rule and our religious traditions, we will not make progress. Look at your own world. During this step, we should take ourselves mentally to the summit of a high mountain where we can stand back and see things from a different perspective. We need to learn how to practice compassion for ourselves. The faith traditions agree that compassion is the most reliable way of putting the self in its proper place, because it requires us all day and every day to dethrone ourselves from the center of the world and put another person there. Once you have started to feel a genuine compassion for yourself, you will be able to extend it to others. Practice mindfulness as we go about our daily lives. Mindfulness designed to give us more control over our minds so that we can reverse ingrained tendencies and cultivate new ones. Be kind. One small act of kindness can turn a life around. Anne Frank reminded us that there are no small acts of kindness. We need to move to broaden our perspectives. The aim of this step is threefold. 1, to recognize and appreciate the unknown and what appears to be unknowable. 2, to become sensitive to overconfident assertions of certainty in ourselves and other people. And 3, to make ourselves aware of the numinous mystery of each human being we encounter during the day. The effort of getting to know one another demands sound information and a willingness to question received ideas. Speak, to share, and listen. We should make a point of asking ourselves whether we want to win the argument or seek the truth, whether we are ready to change our views if the evidence is sufficiently compelling, and whether we are making a place for the other in our minds. Above all, we need to listen. We need to expand our area of concern, to make a place for the more distant other. Understanding different national, cultural, and religious traditions is no longer a luxury. It is now a necessity and must become one of our highest priorities. We need to practice recognition. We've learned that we cannot put ourselves in a special, separate category. Instead, we have tried to cultivate the considerate attitude of Xu, likening to ourselves, relating our own pain to the suffering of others. As a result, we are beginning to acquire what the Tibetan Buddhists call the inability to bear the sight of another's sorrow, so that we feel it almost as intensely as we feel our own. Which of the traditions does not talk about loving our enemies? We are aiming at an impartial, fair-minded assessment of the situation in the cause of peace. Try to wish for our enemies' well-being and happiness. Try to develop a sense of responsibility for our enemies' pain. This is the supreme test of compassion. Practicing compassion brings us to a new way of encountering ourselves and others, and brings us to a new beginning. I want to share a story with you that I have used over many years. And it is a way of understanding from where we came in human history to where we are today. And I ask each of you gathered here to close your eyes and somehow envision the history of the world in a 24-hour period of time. And that by doing this, we might be allowing ourselves a second chance. So here's the story of the world in 24 hours' time. On the stroke of midnight, the people had the world to themselves. For a long while, so far as we know, they were very quiet. All through the morning, all through the afternoon, they just wandered around in small groups, hunting animals with spears and arrows, sheltering in caves, and dressing themselves in skins. At about 6 o'clock in the evening, they began to learn about seeds and manure and so on, and about how to herd and milk animals. By 7:30, some of them were living in big cities. This was mainly in Egypt, North India, and China, and in the countries in between. Moses came and went at about 8:45. Buddha in India, Socrates in Greece, Confucius in China, all came and went together, though they didn't know each other, at about 10:10. Christ was at 10:30, as also, give or take a minute or so, were the Great Wall of China and Julius Caesar. Muhammad was at 11. At about 11:30, there began to be biggest cities in Northern Europe. From about 11:45 onward, people went out from these cities, and they began to steal from the rest of the world. They stole America, both North and South. They stole Northern Asia. They stole India. And just about 4 minutes to midnight, they stole Africa. At about 2 minutes to midnight, they had a big war among themselves. And then they had another big war only 50 seconds later. During the last minute before midnight, these people from Northern Europe were pushed back out of India and Africa, and also back out of many other countries, though not out of North America or Northern Asia, where they had become very satisfied and settled indeed. Also, during this last minute, these people invented nuclear weapons. They landed on the moon. They were responsible for almost doubling the world's population. They used up more oil and more metal than had been used in all the previous 23 hours and 59 minutes put together. It was now midnight again, It's the start of a new day. Compassion is there to help us with guiding into a new century, into a new millennium. We are here to serve each of us and to make the world a better place. Thank you so much.